the woman who watched him fade, the secret love that couldn't save Yu Menglong. They say every star shines brightest before it burns out, and for Yu Menglong, that light was both a blessing and a curse. To the world, he was the charming prince of Chinese dramas, the man whose gentle smile could soften hearts and whose voice could heal a broken soul. But behind the cameras, beneath the flawless image built for screens, there was a quiet ache that fame couldn't fix, an ache only one woman truly saw. She was the woman who watched him fade, the one who stood in the shadows of his spotlight, holding on to a love the world was never meant to see. Their story wasn't one born of glamour or fame. It wasn't the kind of love that makes headlines, not the kind that can survive in a world obsessed with perfection. It was fragile, secret, and painfully real. She met him years before the world claimed him as its own. Back then, Yu Menglong wasn't the megastar. He was just a dreamer, kind, quiet, a little uncertain about his future. She saw the softness in his eyes, the warmth in his laughter, and the way he carried his dreams like they were pieces of glass, beautiful but breakable. As fame found him, everything changed. The world fell in love with the image of Yu Menglong, the idol, the actor, the singer. Every smile he gave became public property, every emotion a performance. But what the cameras could never capture was the heaviness in his chest when the lights went out. She saw it, though. She always did. Late at night, when his voice messages turned from playful to hollow, she heard it, the exhaustion that fame had carved into his spirit. Sometimes, he once told her, I feel like I'm living for everyone but myself. She wanted to tell him it would be okay, that the world would slow down long enough for him to breathe. But fame doesn't wait for anyone, and love can't always save those drowning in silence. She became his quiet refuge, the one he texted when the pressure became too much, the one who knew the difference between his real laughter and the one he used in interviews. When rumors swirled and headlines painted false stories about his life, she stayed silent, watching him fight invisible wars with a grace the world mistook for peace. There were moments of light, too. Days when he'd take her to quiet places far from the city, places where he could be himself again. They'd walk for hours, talking about the ocean, music, dreams, and what it meant to be truly happy. Once he told her that happiness wasn't in the applause but in moments like these, when no one was watching and he could just be. She remembered how his eyes glowed that day, like he was trying to memorize what peace felt like. But even love can't erase the noise of the world. Slowly the cracks began to show. He grew distant, not because he stopped caring, but because he was slipping deeper into a darkness he couldn't name. His messages became shorter, his calls less frequent. When she asked what was wrong, he'd smile and say, I'm just tired. But it wasn't the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was the kind that came from carrying too much, expectations, loneliness, perfection. He tried to keep her away from it, to protect her from the shadows that followed him. You deserve light, he once said, and I don't have much of that left. She cried that night, not because she understood, but because she didn't know how to reach him anymore. Then came the silence. The night the world found out about Yu Menglong's death, she was alone. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages, friends, fans, reporters, everyone asking the same question she couldn't answer. Her hands shook as she scrolled through his photos, each one smiling brighter than the last. But she knew. She had always known that behind every perfect photo was a man quietly fading. The last message he sent her was simple, "Thank you for seeing me." She read it over and over again, trying to understand what he meant. She thought it was just another message of gratitude, another moment of reflection from a man who often spoke in metaphors. But it wasn't. It was goodbye. In the days that followed, the world mourned the actor, the artist, the star. Tributes poured in from everywhere. Fans lit candles, sang his songs, replayed his dramas with trembling voices. Social media was flooded with pictures of his smile, captions about his kindness, hashtags filled with heartbreak. Yet, amidst the chaos, she grieved in silence. Because her loss wasn't just of a celebrity, it was of the man behind the mask. She remembered the little things, how he hummed when he was nervous, how he used to write lyrics on napkins, how he'd always stop to help stray animals. She remembered how he once said he wished he could disappear for a while and just be ordinary. Now he had disappeared, but not in the way anyone wanted. In private, she revisited their old messages, the voice notes where his laughter still lived, the pictures they never shared. It was like touching a ghost, a love that had existed in the spaces between fame and solitude. She wanted to tell the world about him, to show that beneath the idol was a man who wanted nothing more than to be loved simply, without expectations. But she couldn't. Their love had been secret, not because it was wrong, but because it was fragile. In her heart, she carried guilt. Could she have done more? Should she have stayed when he pushed her away? The questions haunted her long after the lights of his memorial dimmed. But love doesn't always come with answers, only memories heavy with what-ifs. Some nights, she still dreams of him, not as the star everyone adored, but as the boy she met long ago, sitting under a flickering streetlight, talking about music and meaning. In those dreams, he isn't tired. He's smiling genuinely freely. Sometimes, she wakes up with tears on her cheeks, whispering his name into the dark. The world moved on as it always does. New dramas aired, new stars rose, and his name slowly faded from trending pages. But for her, time stopped the day he left. She kept the pendant he once gave her, a tiny silver star. "For when you can't find me," he'd said, "just look for this." It was ironic, she thought, because even when he was gone, his light refused to fade completely. Every year on his birthday, she visits the same quiet spot by the river where they once walked. She sits there for hours, watching the water reflect the sky, whispering the words she never got to say, "I saw you," even when no one else did. The pain never truly left her, but over time, she learned to turn it into something softer, not an open wound, but a gentle scar. A reminder that love, even when it fails to save, still has the power to heal. And maybe that was what Yu Menglong wanted all along. Not to be remembered for the roles he played, but for the soul he shared with those who looked closely enough to see it. In a world that adored his perfection, there was one woman who loved his flaws. One woman who saw the beauty in his sadness, the poetry in his silence. And though she couldn't save him, her love became the last quiet witness to his truth, that even stars, no matter how bright, need someone who sees them when they begin to fade. Because in the end, Yu Menglong didn't just leave behind a legacy of art and music. He left behind a story of love that was never meant to be told. A love that tried to fight against the darkness but lost to the weight of fame, fear, and the fragility of being human. The world only saw the brilliance of Yu Menglong, the carefully polished star who smiled through exhaustion, bowed through heartbreak, and gave everything he had to a world that kept asking for more. But she saw something different. She saw the trembling hands after the lights went off, the silent tears he wiped before walking into another interview, the moments when he'd stare into space and whisper, "I don't know who I am anymore." Every time she looked at him, she could see the boy he used to be fighting to survive beneath the man the world demanded he become. Fame had stolen his peace, little by little, and she could only watch as the man she loved began to disappear behind the mask of Yu Menglong, the idol. One night, in the middle of a rare pause between filming schedules, he called her. His voice was quiet, almost afraid. "Do you ever feel like you're living in a dream you can't wake up from?" he asked. She knew what he meant. He wasn't talking about dreams of success. He was talking about the endless loop of pretending, the smiling for cameras, the emptiness after the applause. "I used to think I wanted this," he continued, "but now I just want to be me again." She wanted to hold him through the phone, to remind him that he, not the fame, not the roles, not the expectations, was enough. But her words caught in her throat, because she knew he didn't need comfort. He needed freedom, something she couldn't give him. When they met in secret, it was always away from the city lights. He'd wear a cap and mask, always cautious, always looking over his shoulder. But when they were finally alone, he'd remove them and take a deep breath, like someone surfacing from deep water. "I can breathe here," he'd say softly, and she'd smile, even though her heart was breaking, because she knew those stolen moments were the only times he felt alive. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar. He'd play quietly by the water, humming melodies that never made it to the studio. Songs about longing, about feeling unseen, about being trapped in a body everyone adored but few understood. She'd close her eyes and listen, letting his voice fill the empty night. Once, after finishing a song, he looked at her with that familiar bittersweet smile and said, "If I ever disappear, promise me you'll remember me like this. Not the actor, not the singer, just me." She laughed then, brushing off the heaviness of his words. "You're not going anywhere." But he only smiled, that soft, knowing smile that would later haunt her dreams. As his fame grew, their love became something fragile, hidden between rehearsals, interviews, and sleepless nights. He stopped replying as quickly. Their meetings became shorter, his voice more distant. "I'm just busy," he'd say, but she could hear the weight in his tone, the way busy was slowly becoming a shield for broken. She saw the comments online, fans demanding perfection, critics dissecting his every move. Every time he smiled on screen, she wondered what he had to sacrifice to keep that image alive. The man who once wrote songs about light now avoided mirrors, afraid of what looked back. There was one evening that stayed etched in her heart. It was raining, soft, endless rain that blurred the city lights. He came to her door, drenched and trembling. She pulled him inside without a word, and he just stood there, water dripping from his hair, eyes hollow. Then, quietly, he said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his body shake as he whispered, "They love who I pretend to be, but no one loves me." She wanted to scream that she did, that she had always loved him, the real him, the broken, imperfect man behind the smile. But instead, she just held him tighter, because some truths are too fragile to speak aloud. That night, they stayed together until dawn. He fell asleep in her arms, his breathing uneven, his heart racing like it was running from something unseen. She brushed her fingers through his hair and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, that he would find peace, that things would get better, that love could still save him. But love, as she would learn, isn't always enough. Weeks later, he vanished again into work. She'd text, and sometimes he'd reply with brief messages. "I'm fine. Just tired. Don't worry." But the silence between those words grew heavier. Then one day he sent her a photo, the sunrise from his balcony, soft light breaking through clouds. Underneath it, he wrote, "It's beautiful today. Maybe tomorrow will be too." She didn't know that would be the last message he ever sent. When the news of his death broke, her world went silent. Everything blurred, the flashing headlines, the cries of fans, the endless replaying of his final moments online. Reporters called it tragic, sudden, unbelievable. But she knew it wasn't sudden. She had seen it coming, in every forced smile, every unfinished text, every tear he never let fall in public. In the quiet of her apartment, she listened to the last song he'd written for her, a melody without words. He'd played it for her once and said, "It's about someone who saves me, even when she doesn't know she is." She wept listening to it, realizing that even his love songs had been cries for help wrapped in poetry. After his funeral, she visited the river where they used to meet. The world was loud with grief, but the water was calm, a mirror of all the unspoken things left behind. She sat there, holding the pendant he had given her, whispering through tears, "I saw you. I always did." The breeze was gentle, carrying faint echoes of his laughter. She closed her eyes, imagining him there, free at last from the weight he could no longer bear. In the years that followed, she never spoke publicly about their love. She kept it sacred, hidden, just like he had wanted. But every time one of his songs played, every time she saw a photo of that familiar smile, she'd feel the ache of knowing what the world never did. That behind the fame, behind the perfection, was a man who only ever wanted to be loved for who he really was. And though she couldn't save him, she carried him in every quiet night, in every fading sunset, in every dream where he still reached for her hand. Because some love stories don't end when one heart stops beating. They live on in memories and songs, in the silence between words. For Yu Menglong, his light may have faded too soon, but for the woman who watched him fade, that light still burns, softly, endlessly, in the corners of a heart that refuses to forget.